It would just be one more way of very specifically addressing this part of the human experience or this broad neighborhood of the human experiences that we can have, and to have the medical world, which does have certain sort of universal culture spanning, nation spanning, world
Does.
spanning
Yeah.
aspects to it, like what you find, scientific articles and the culture of medicine and the related innovations and technologies that go along with that. They span the globe and they cross across all sorts of social demographics. A migraine is a migraine is a migraine, kind of pretty much wherever you go, except some of those places which may recognize some potentially emergent aspects to it, which is a whole nother story. So, um, and in that sort of a way, this is one of the leverage points where if we have this vision that a humanity that is sort of more awakened or attuned to the divine or coming into the presence or whatever, pick your favorite language for this whole thing, is a good idea, then I can pretty much guarantee it will scale better if somebody in the clinical mainstream owns this stuff. And I think the trickle down effects to other specialties will be profound, because I think doctors are very reluctant to acknowledge things they don't know. Even if somewhere there are some people with an MD that say, "Oh, I don't know about this stuff, but they do." There's some things where we know a lot of depth in. But I can say, "I don't know about that weird oncology thing, but I have oncologists I can refer you to." In the same way, if they're clinical phenomeniatrists or experiential medicine people, and if they're, "Oh, yeah, I don't know anything about this weird thing you're going through, but there are experiential medicine people," and even just being able to say that and have a referral that you can then do and feel comfortable, and these are people who are trained in this strange stuff, that will be system changing, and I think that will lead some kind of world change of acceptance.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. Hey, things are really happening fast around here, ladies and gentlemen. Really fast. There's a lot of people recognizing that humanity's got a little problem with itself, like a self-destructive course, perhaps, and have the opportunity to talk to a physician who is interested in emergent phenomena, which we will discuss what that actually means. Uh, and we'll see how that applies what he's doing to the future of humanity. Uh, Daniel Ingram is CEO, founder, and board chairman of Emergence Benefactors. It's a 501c charity. Retired emergency medicine physician, he still thinks that way, an infectious disease epidemiologist, and author of Mastering Core Teachings of the Buddha, and co-author of The Fire of Kasina, main organizer of the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium. And that's what we're going to get to, emergent phenomena. He does neurophenomenology research on advanced meditation with a team at Harvard, co-founded the Dharma Overground, and promotes various public health and philanthropic projects worldwide. Philosophical, I'd say, too. That's why I got mixed up with those, both of them. He's got some great ideas, and is working to help humanity. And so welcome back to Connecting with Coincidence, Daniel.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Bernie.
You're welcome. Now let's get right to the core question here. How will emergent phenomena help humanity to evolve spiritually, psychologically, and interpersonally?
Well, that is really the key question of my life and work these days, so it's exciting to be talking about this. So first, what do we mean by emergent phenomena? So most people, when they say spiritual, mystical, magical, energetic, psychedelic, psi, etc. phenomena, we at the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium lump those all into one category of emergent phenomena. Now, I have to be careful because this is instantly, some people are going to say, you're saying consciousness is an emergent property then of insensate particles or forces. We are actually not making that ontological leap. What we are using the word emergent in is the sense of basic sort of systems theory or chaos mathematics, which basically says there are properties that emerge from systems that we don't really understand. So it's more as an expression of ignorance, an expression of unknowing, an expression of uncertainty. We don't really understand how people have these experiences. We don't have a lot of great science on these things. What we do know is they can be very powerful. They can be very transformative. They can be very challenging. And when people have like a conversion experience or are touched by the spirit, or they like could go to a Kundalini yoga class and have energy blasting up and down their spine, or go on an intensive meditation retreat and get into all kinds of wild territory as described by ancient texts and experience today, or take a psychedelic, which is one of the more common ways that people now are getting into them as these things become more accessible and even decriminalized and even sort of semi-legalized in a lot of places and part of the therapeutic modalities and even discussed now at the national level for veterans and people like that. So the idea is that all of these types of experiences, which the clinical mainstream is pretty bad at, to put gently, really not trained in, not very skillful in, doesn't have a lot of diagnostic categories or words for, but we at the EPRC are really trying to figure out how the scientific, clinical, public health, and public mainstreams can be much better at relating to these things in a skillful way that improves outcomes. So you're asking the same question as we are. How can these things help people be better? And it's a huge topic, so I just thought I'd stop there in case you had anything you wanted to say. I'd been talking for a while, and then I could plunge into my answer to your question.
Yeah, it's my question, and you've outlined it, and I think emergent deserves a little bit of clarification because you talked about chaos theory and complexity theory,
Hmm.
and it's for our audience to know that this kind of who knows what's going to happen thing in chaos theory does have some ways of being measured and equations written and complexity also. So you get all this stuff that sounds complex and chaos, but stuff emerges. And that's the way you're using the word emergent. We don't know
Right,
what's going on, but it emerges.
that's right.
And,
And
and go ahead.
go ahead. And
Well,
so then your question really is, how can these things help people? And I'll just sort of start with, I'm just going to go to the top, like awakening in the grand old classical sense of people waking up in some very direct, literal, profound way to something very important about their experience, about who they are, about how reality works, stuff about what time is, stuff about the observer and the subject. There are a lot of different ways to think about awakening. The traditions describe this in a lot of different ways. But if we, I'm going to be pretty coarse here, and I'm not very nuanced, but appreciation of things about interconnectedness, general appreciation of a sense of something very natural happening in experience, a sense of something changing in the sense of a self and how it relates to phenomena, and some kind of clarity generally around things like the raw experience of emotions, of thoughts, which in some ways has been found to be freeing, and then something deeply existential about what it is even to be aware, to be present, that might be hard to describe, and the traditions have various takes on this. I don't want to get into too many orthodoxies and debates and battles here, but the general idea is that there is something that is described across a whole lot of human traditions that people have been discovering and rediscovering. You'll find I'm something of a rough clinical perennialist, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think everything is exactly the same across all traditions, but there is something clinical, really, where if you talk to enough people, sort of a rough clinical perennialism where people talk about a lot of the same stuff, even coming from a lot of traditions, the visions, the energy stuff, the shifts in consciousness, something of the sequences in which these things might unfold, some of the sort of powersy experiences, if you will. Uh, uh,
yeah,
just
that's
keep
it.
hearing the same things
You
again and
keep hearing
again.
the
So
same thing.
yeah.
So when you talk about Venn diagrams with two different circles having something in common, it's a simple way to think. That's that
Hmm.
commonality that you're focused on, and as you should be. And as I've written about psychotherapy, I looked at what's common among the psychotherapies. And this ability and this drive you have in your organization to find out what's underlying all these emergent phenomenon is essential here. It's essential to be able to articulate them clearly. Some of what
Hmm.
you describe is being present, which is the power of now was a popularized way of happening, but what is being present with your environment, what is being present with someone, which is very important in what I'm writing about, being present together with the other person, being present with you. These are phenomena that are very much worth discussing. When you
Yes.
started, you were talking about very important ideas about time, um, and the nature of reality. And you're kind of referring to what I might describe as mystical experiences.
Yeah.
So there's something about derivative from mystical phenomenology that is leading to some of the descriptions I'm hearing from you.
Yeah. And, you as someone who studies therapy and psychology and psychiatry and how those one of the things that obviously is a simple thing to point out is the mindfulness tradition where you learn to really see thoughts as thoughts and sensations as sensations, right? So starting at this very basic but fundamental level of some kind of basic clarity that then allows more of like a Freudian sense of ego strength around things. When you get some space around stuff, when they seem a little bit more objective, observable, transient, natural, then this can lead to the ability to investigate these things at a psychological level without freaking out as much, to be able to tolerate pain in a different way, to be able to yeah, relate to emotions and see how a thought triggers a physical sensation triggers a thought, and these interact back and forth. So even at the very basic level, certain meditative technologies and attentional technologies are really fundamental to the entire way that therapy and a lot of other healing modalities work. And then and then the ability to be present, as you mentioned, with somebody else and to be meta aware of how present you are and what's your attention like, what's it focused on, what's it excluding and not excluding. These are kind of basic things one might learn in formal meditation training, for example, which also people just generally find extremely helpful. Now, the trick though is it can get weirder. As soon as people really start paying attention and start noticing, it can change, right? The way that the system is functioning. It's not sort of sort of neutral or non the sort of notion that it doesn't do anything except help you be more present. That's not really true. And so, I've talked to thousands of people over the years. Somewhere in the late 90s, I hung out a shingle and said, if you're having weird stuff happen to you, I'll talk to you about it for free. I won't even take a donation. It turns out when you do that, you get to talk to thousands of people about their weird stuff, particularly if you found a big online community, the Dharma Overground, where people can talk about this. And it turns out there are all kinds of people that are sort of, like not necessarily spiritual weirdos, although plenty of those too, but like plenty of doctors and lawyers and engineers and particularly tech people and who are having fascinating adventures in consciousness, and not only in things that seem relatively near to the shore like dreams, but like powerful senses of lightning blasting up and down their spine and sense of journeying to other realms without psychedelics or when they're awake, or like all kinds of fascinating shifts in consciousness where they can be like going on the classic hero's journey where they have a big high, first initial opening, initiation, and then they plunge down into the underworld, and then they eventually come to sort of, more spacious, more mature equanimity about the whole thing. These sorts of cyclical journeys described in so many traditions, whether you call them the stages of insight or the knowledges of suffering or the the Christians have various maps for this stuff, ladders of love, and you can find stuff in lots of different traditions. Yeah, so these journeys are poorly understood by psychiatry and psychology. And if you start having this stuff and you tell a neurologist or a psychiatrist or psychologist, like I was just talking to a person recently, and they went to a neurologist for all these curious movement things that were happening, and they got a big workup, and they got an MRI, and they got EEG, and they got all this stuff, which was all normal, and that was really helpful. It's like, okay, great, doctor, you did your job. And then they said, you are hysterical. This is just hysteria. This is a word that they didn't find as helpful as an occupational therapist they visited, who actually knew how to get them to attentionally go in and work out some of these energetic knots. And they started getting real relief, and like through interesting attentional and meditative and physical manipulation techniques, they were actually able to deal with these emergent phenomena in a way that really helped them. So at the individual level, you have this sense that that increased ability to normalize and to have technical lexicons, descriptive taxonomies, and functional knowledge accumulated across lots of traditions and thousands of years of how to improve outcomes related to these things can make a real difference in patients and people's and experiencers' lives, and the lives of their families and communities. And then that's sort of at the, we've started to then expand out from the individual level to the kind of broader level. Like we've been talking about the systems reform level of helping doctors understand this stuff better. But then at the big societal level, right? That's kind of your question. What would a collective awakening or a collective, enlightenment, a collective coming into some sort of much more expansive, clear, precise, realistic, more sense appreciative, in a skillful way, what would it and a skillful relationship to the deep end of the weird, the magical, the mystical,
Yeah.
the strange,
Yeah.
right? What would that look like? What would it look like if we really integrated a lot of what Carl Jung was talking about into society? Even Freud, like if I went back to Freud, like Freud has said a lot of goofy stuff, right? But he said some really important things, right? Some of his stuff was not so crazy. And this idea that we have these unexamined shadow sides, that we
Yeah.
have these parts of ourselves, these stories we've been telling ourselves that may not be so skillful. It just so happens that when you start going on the emergent journey, when you have your first big openings and then you enter in some of the more complicated territory, that a lot of opportunities for real deeper psychological exploration and healing show up. And it just so happens that, as the traditions describe, and we can talk about how you might advertise the benefits. Every tradition has its own
And they do. And they do.
thing, but they tend to converge in some common themes, right? And some of the common themes of convergence are increased, like, dare I say, words like saintliness, like, being more altruistic, being more empathic, being more poised, having more ability to relate with more mature coping mechanisms rather than immature ones, appreciation of the interdependence of systems, of individuals, of humanity, appreciation of the collective, appreciation of things like Gaia hypothesis, and this notion that we're all in this together on a common planet, as well as an appreciation of the remarkable sort of magical, mythical forces that drive stories and drive narratives and drive civilizations. Right, manifest destiny drove a whole lot of
Oh,
killing a
yeah.
whole lot of people, and there these sort of mythic ways of relating to reality. Some of this work can give you an appreciation of how to more skillfully relate to the world of myth and magic, both individually and collectively, as the stories we tell ourselves and the sort of egregores or sort of aggregations of emotion and energy that kind of move through societies.
Now let's get to the phenomenology themselves, and
Wow.
let's see if we can, in this discussion, and you're talking about all kinds of literature that you know better than I do because you've gone through all of it. I'm kind of just like, okay, so that happens. What do you do with it?
Yeah.
That's and you've got, I mean, emergency room physician. You did that. So let's look at some of these emergent phenomenon. And just take your favorite list and see how they help people evolve in the ways that you have just described.
Well, to take a really practical example, right before before you hit record, we were talking about somebody having a pain in a muscle that was causing them a lot of trouble, right? And so if someone has a pain in a muscle, there are cool and interesting mind techniques that sometimes, if the pain is not sort of what I'll call purely a result of some kind of injury or something else going on, then there are these techniques, such as described in the book I was talking to you about, Internal Moving Healing by Robert Harry Hover, where by using attention, one can go into these things. So I was just talking to a family member today that I was doing some remodeling and construction work, and he was talking about how I was talking to the stuff about with him, and he said, last night I had this pain in my leg. And you would talk to me about going into the pain and noticing the vibrations of the pain and the edges of the pain and really increasing the resolution. And he said, I had been having this pain in my leg for a while, and I just went into it and went into it and went into it. And all of a sudden it started getting much quicker. And it kind of felt like He said it felt like some really fast kid, like doing a Rubik's Cube, is how he described it. He could put his hands like this. And then he said it started zzz, and then it just went zoop. And then it just felt like this zipping energy shot out through his foot, and the pain went away and has been gone. So that's the kind of thing where that's a very simple thing. Where just increasing the resolution and the attention to an area and the area around it, eventually it can somehow move through. That doesn't mean it might not get worse or do other strange things along the way. This is a complicated topic. Or things like trauma release exercises. So it's like this idea where you get things to shake in the same way that like dogs will shake off a trauma and then just kind of trot away smiling. In the same way, humans also have this ability. Crying is one of these things. We kind of shake and something traumatic moves through, but trauma release exercises, talking at a very mundane, kind of practical level where you kind of get big muscles to shake, like your psoas muscles or your quads or something. And by doing that, it can somehow cause kind of sort of energetic, psychological, mind body, something catharsis, and things can kind of clear out. Again, crying can serve the same function. So this is talking at sort of like a kind of a basic, just dealing with pains and psychological stuff and traumas, where there is this kind of energetic component, which is one of the things we sort of fold into the general category of emergent phenomena.
Well,
Or,
when you say the energetic phenomenon fold
yeah,
in, there's a lot to energy. I mean, you do very
this is a
basic.
huge topic. I'm starting really simple, the stuff people
You
can
did,
relate
and
to.
you stayed with the muscle, and don't want to go too far because I want to hear about other emergent phenomena, but to be aware of one's own bioenergetic field.
Hmm.
Uh, that is part of what is important for the future human,
I
is
think
to
so.
be is to and so please talk about what the biomagnetic energetic field is and why that's not just important for the individual but also for interpersonal relations and more.
Well, that's a great question. So the first thing, I don't necessarily know what it is. Like, I take a pretty ontologically neutral stand on a lot of the stuff, where I don't say it is this, or it is that, or it is cosmic consciousness, or it is divine love, or it is the dream of the great god Vishnu, or whatever. I don't know. Like, I don't know what these things are, and I don't really know how to prove them. As a Bayesian, if you said, here are four hypotheses about what this is, I wouldn't know how to change my priors or likelihood ratios, what experiment is going to drive it in one direction or another. I don't, so, but what I do know is experientially, these things feel like energy. You can look at the energy like experiences. They vibrate, they sometimes move, they feel like lightning sometimes. They have they kind of feel like you've touched an electric oscillating AC current a little bit, or sometimes very strongly. And so, uh, experientially, they feel like energy. So I'm going to call them energy like experiences. And sometimes through whatever processes, again, meditation, psychedelics, yoga, all kinds of things, some people just naturally experience this, we can start to notice our body has this sort of buzzy energetic quality to it. And we can start to notice even what they describe as channels. Now, there's lots of systems of channels or chakras, energy centers, right? Commonly here, 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 down low, sort of Dantian. Like, there are all these different maps of them. If you look at across Taoism or Hinduism or Tibetans, or esoteric Theravada, there's a lot of different maps of these things, but they all kind of have some similar commonalities. And the idea is energy centers and channels. And then sometimes people in meditation or other, sort of extreme states of mind will notice these things. Sometimes you can even see them, feel them, manipulate them. They don't
Yeah.
always look exactly like the maps, but this is something you can come into a human awareness of. And doing that generally is a good idea. Now, it can also do weird stuff, which is where like it can cause strange movements, it can cause weird balance problems, it can cause very bizarre perceptual things, sense of postural asymmetry and muscle spasms and other strange stuff. So sometimes the process of coming into an awareness of what we might call our energy-like system or energy body, or pick your favorite words for this thing, can have its rough moments in the same way that adolescence hopefully eventually leads to adulthood, in the same way waking up to the sense of an energetic component to experience, or an energy-like component to experience, sometimes has a cost to it. Sometimes can be dramatic, sometimes can be very subtle, sometimes can be really extremely pleasant and pleasurable and create sort of hypomanic or manic-like episodes. Sometimes can be really awful and feel like a person is being shocked or blasted or zapped or twitching or other bizarre things. So there's a lot that can be said about energetics, but I can guarantee you that a physician that understands there are energy-like phenomena and a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and they have their pros and cons, and here's a whole literature on them, which again I could go on about for hours, but
You
it's
sure
gonna
can.
it's going to do better than one who doesn't know that, right? So one of our goals as a consortium is to help the clinical mainstream and the public mainstream wake up to the fact that this is something, an experience that some people will have, and it can normalize across a range of how it can go, and that there are a whole bunch of techniques which we haven't head-to-head compared. We don't have randomized clinical trials of whether Kundalini yoga is better than TRE versus whatever other thing for Qi or Qigong or who knows. We've never really done the experiments of which are the best things for an individual, or like how you make general population-based recommendations. We don't know. But we do know that there are these things that people experience, there are these techniques and ways of working with them that probably help generally, and that knowledge of these things and ability to normalize them and to have a taxonomy around them of some working variety is going to be better than not. So that's
And
one of the, with regard to energy phenomena, in a clinical pragmatic point of view, that's what we're hoping to
and that's what
upgrade.
I'm looking for. And
Yep.
what you're writing a book that in
Mhm.
some way combines psychiatry and psychology, and you have a name
Actually,
for it.
it's worse than that, but yes,
It's-
it's a clinical phenomeniatry. So in the same way as you've got the PhD or a master's level of psychology, and then you've got the MD, which is psychiatry, right? In psychiatry, they get a whole lot more biochemistry training, and they prescribe meds, and they might order MRIs or tests or send you to other specialists, right? There's a lot more. MD has just got a lot more, and these people get more, generally the psychologists get more training in therapy, right? And how to talk to people, and usually this is sort of, there's psychiatrists that are more talky and therapists that are more likely to send you a medical specialist. Obviously it's complicated, but this is the basic idea. So in the same way you have phenomenology, which is the PhD or master's level study of the field of these sort of interesting experiences that people have, and in this case, emergent phenomenology. And then the MD level of emergent phenomenology, we're hopefully going to call phenomeniatry. So iatry means the healing related to, ology is the study of. So the healing related to, or the MD version of phenomenatry is the specialty we're hoping to start. And I hope to write a first rough, transitional, initial textbook of clinical phenomenatry. And when I say write, I should mention some of it will be writing by me. I hope to chief edit it as well. So I'm going to bring in a whole lot of people to help me, right? Because this is going to be quite a project to write a first textbook for a new medical specialty. That is a big thing to do. And that's going to take a lot of smart, thoughtful people contributing a lot of things. But it would be kind of like, what should an ophthalmologist know about a person seeing bright lights or having visions? Right, so that they but also like, what should a meditation teacher know about? No, that's not seeing. That's like a retinal detachment. you need to go get an ER now. That's not just a Kundalini thing, right? That's not okay. So those kinds of bits of knowledge, which we hope both sides can gain from each other. What can the MD world and the clinical medical world, the middle of, the APP, advanced practice provider, that the clinical world know about the meditation world that would make it a lot more sophisticated, and vice versa, right? So the kind of thing that a meditation teacher might read and say, oh, no, that's not Kundalini, that's a seizure, and they need a workup for that, and to not drive, and to go get an EEG and maybe an MRI of their brain or something. So that kind of knowledge, or that's not, like a major opening, that's hyperthyroidism. They need so
that is so cool.
or that's their no, that's not just tingling from Kundalini. Their calcium is totally out of whack. That's muscle spasm. No, they need so that kind of knowledge, which weirdly enough, nobody's ever written down. I was trying to find a book on this. There isn't one. What's a reasonable medical text that takes the deep end weird, the woo-woo, the stuff we call emergent phenomena, the mystical, magical, spiritual, energetic, etc., and medicine seriously in the same breath? There isn't one. There are books that take this seriously and books that take this seriously. We're going to write the first one that takes them both just equally seriously as real things
Oh,
that
right.
deserve real consideration and are interwoven and very complicated. When should you be thinking about, no, that's porphyria. Look at that abdominal pain and there's triggers for it. Like that's not their meditation
You're
adventure.
you're a man on a mission, Daniel,
Oh,
and
yes, I am.
now I know more clearly that
Hmm.
mission. And I've had a bit of a mission with synchronicity, and I've been trying to like do the same thing in kind of a smaller scale with the psychiatrists, get not calling somebody who's talking about things matching between my mind and my environment, and not
Hmm.
calling them crazy, which is has tended to be the usual thing, which is what you're also addressing or will
Or maybe
address.
not just crazy. So maybe they are crazy and maybe they're also having lots of cool synchronicities, right? Because
That
you could have both, right? You could
you
have
can
medical
have.
problems and kundalini. You could have whatever.
I'm just starting with the polarity. We definitely
Sure.
can have both, and I've seen them with mania,
Yeah.
because you can do both with being
Hmm.
manic and need some lithium. But
But
let's
mania and also like major energetic openings can present just like mania. And how can you tell the difference? Or is
Yeah.
there a difference? Or when do they overlap? Really important questions.
And I'm asking you, what are you doing in your book about synchronicity?
That's a great question. So you're literally on my list. It was actually a curious synchronicity that you dialed up because you're one of the people. Again, to write a book like this, I would more describe myself as much chief editor as um, author. And so one of the things I wanted to do is to talk to you and people, people like Sharon Rowlett, et cetera, and say, hey, what should a clinical mainstream person know about the world of synchronicities such that they have a really skillful relationship to it? And what's in your differential, and when should you actually think about medical anything? And can when like do you start to have any concerns? Like, or is this all pure all synchronicities are just cool and there's never anything to be concerned about? Or these are important questions. And how do you think about this in a really skillful, sophisticated way rather than is crazy or doesn't exist or oh yeah, okay.
Well, I
You know.
was really happy to get a little paper article in Psychiatric Times when a symptom isn't a sign. Uh,
Right.
and that symptom sign difference, a lot of physicians have trouble with anyway.
Hmm.
But that's, you understand that a symptom is something, but the sign is of the disease itself. And I wanted to be able to put that out there and see, get it in a psychiatric something or other. And somehow, with the help of a very good friend of mine, we did.
Nice.
And this tries to make it somewhat reasonable that people experience these. And it's a as you're suggesting, one of the many subsets of what you're addressing. But the thing about synchronicity is it gets ignored in a lot of the emergent phenomena, parapsychological things. I mean, it's amazing how it gets ignored. And part of the reason it gets ignored is because it covers, it's an umbrella for a lot of different phenomena, as well as does something very clearly that mind and environment are much more closely related than we are being taught. And a lot of people don't like that.
Well, again, that's the sense of sort of increased sense of interdependence or interconnection among things,
Yes.
which is one of the generally mentioned aspects of the trajectory of what we might loosely call awakening enlightenment, some sort of coming into a deeper or greater knowing of something very important that can be
Yes.
very helpful. And it's also really common for people at certain particular phases of that journey, such as stages I would call the arising and passing away, and other people would call other things, for people to notice a lot of synchronicities. So I actually think this is stage and state specific, as we may have talked about in the previous podcast when we talked about these. I can't remember, but there are certain phases of meditation where I hear people
Hmm.
very clearly describe there's like a much higher chance they're going to be talking about synchronicities and particularly interesting things like prognostic dreams as well as like other people experiencing things around them like these things so sort of come and like there it's not just them having these curious
All right.
synchronicities but other
Right.
people start when one person starts like it can sort of spread a little bit
Oh
in
yeah.
that energetic contagion kind of way
Yeah.
and so these kinds of phenomena are much more likely to be reported. And also, when you're around someone who's having a lot of synchronicities, there's a sense of an energy and a feel to that, right? There, it does something.
It does something, and it
Yeah.
happens.
Hmm.
Thank you for that part of it. And yes, there is an overlap between having a psychiatric disorder and seeing a lot of coincidences, and you got to make that separation. And you're doing that. Now, the question that I keep leading back to with you and that I'm trying to work on is how are you addressing the interpersonal possibilities, potential contributions of emergent phenomena? How do they help people interpersonally?
Well, the first thing to know is that they happen. So, I'll give you an interesting example. You mentioned Fire Casino, my book called, with Shannon Stein called The Fire Casino. When people go on these retreats that are not taking part in the retreat, like we had one person who cooked, or we've had some people who come and research, we're doing this very, very, very intensive practices that lead to us getting very, very weird. And we start seeing things that other people can't see, or sometimes other people can see, which is vastly more interesting. And the people around us feel it. They feel something. So the first is this is not occurring in a vacuum of a human. Somehow being around these things does something. The second thing in terms of interpersonal is that if you have experience with these things, it is much easier to relate to other people who have had experiences of these things. So there is something to that in the same way that it's hard to discuss harmony with people who are tone deaf. You can kind of in theory, but it's not really the same. In the same way, um, like people who can hear it or feel it or see it or have been there resonate better. So recognizing also that if people haven't had these kinds of experiences, like it can be jarring to them because they don't, it doesn't resonate because they haven't attuned to it or whatever you want to call it, haven't opened to it yet. And so being sensitive to interpersonal stuff around these things, like what is a person's experience level and how is this a person you can resonate with regarding whatever you're talking about? These are kind of like basics. And then in the clinical world, recognizing that the sort of energetic frame or attentional frame or mood or whatever you want to call it, vibe is pretty good word actually, I think,
It
for this.
is. It's a
The
good
vibe
word.
of the therapist or the healer or the physician or whatever the provider is going to have a major impact on what you're able to pick up on and come through and how you're going to be able to establish a relationship with someone. So being aware of the this side helps you become aware of the that side and also helps them feel comfortable relating to you. So establishing a personal relationship or a therapeutic relationship involves the ability to also check out on this side what's going on. In the same way, like there in the ER, this is really important. Like this is an example I've used in a number of podcasts. Like when you go from running a code where you're essentially the commander of an emergency situation to walking in to say that to the family that their loved one has died. Like you've got to be able to in like maybe 30 seconds to do an incredibly powerful energetic shift because if you walk in hyped up commander mode to a grieving family, it's usually a disaster, right? It does not, it freaks them out. But if you come in as a calm, accepting, present, open, very sort of transparent, rather than very like forceful or projective presence into a room with people, then their energy can move through in a way that it feels very different and usually a lot better. So
That's such an important skill, Daniel,
mhm.
to be able to switch, I'll call them energy frequencies,
Yeah.
um, because we have different frequencies, just like the
Hmm.
muscles do that we were talking about earlier.
Hmm.
There's a lot of vibes. Vibration is a name for multiple frequencies that
Yep.
we emanate, that to come off of us, and we can just talk about what
Hmm.
that actually is, but people pick that up.
Oh yeah.
And for you to be able to say, as you said so cleanly and clearly, 30 seconds from one like emergency intense thing,
Hmm.
and grief and loss for yourself because you weren't able to help the person and all the
Right.
other things that would go on with you, and then
Hmm.
walk 15 steps to a room where the family is terribly anxious, and
Hmm.
in those 15 steps, somehow change your frequency to
Yep.
something that's more modulated and empathic. That's an
Hmm.
incredible skill.
Yeah, and learning to do that also with patients experiencing emergent phenomena. So if a person comes to you very up or very amazed or very challenged or very ugh, whatever it is they're coming to you with, like being aware of how your side is responding to that side is not only often helps establish a therapeutic relationship, but also tells you something because we're sort of like antennas for this stuff, right? And you can kind of tune the antenna to be more or less receptive to certain bands of it,
That's
which
right.
is a funny thing to kind of try to explain to someone. Like you could like it's kind of like in pediatric and sick kids, like you've got 20 kids and they all have a fever and they're all vomiting and they all have a cough and runny nose, but one of them's septic and the rest are not. Right. And the question is, who do you do a spinal tap on and get blood cultures and hospitalized and give antibiotics to? And who do you say the mom, yes, your kid has a cold and they're fine. Come back if you get worse. Yes, they have a ready or maybe some moxilin or something. I don't know. Whatever, like that kind of thing. Like it's very hard to tell people who can't do it how to do it. But and some people can do it and some people can sort of learn to do it and some people just can't do it. They can't tell. They're like sick kid, I don't know. And so in that same kind of way, like there is a skill set that some people are better or worse at, which is tuning into like what is this antenna picking up and what how can you tune to various aspects of this person in front of you and what they're conveying and what does the whole system then tell you or what's happening with their family as they or their friends as they come in, right? What's happening with those interactions? Sometimes the interactions but like of and the dynamics that are set up by a person presenting a certain way will actually tell you a lot. And if you know how to read it, can be very diagnostic or like hint at patterns that become familiar if you are around enough of these things. And so I'm sort of still talking about in the therapeutic context, but in the societal context,
Yeah.
imagine if we could do this as a society. Like imagine if some country in the Middle East and some country in the West could sit down in a way that was vastly more like attuned to everybody's resonances and messaging and conveyance and shadow stories and the whole grand experience of this very complicated thing, which it is to be human and in a collective and as part of these big resonance of social movements and memes that go crashing around through society in these viral ways, like in the and the energy and the emotion of that and the mythos of that. Imagine if we had individually and so then reflected collectively a vastly more sophisticated ability to tune from code to, you know, grief and to modulate our own responses to things and to be aware of all the levels on which we're responding to things and to get more fluent in more of those levels, which can be very subtle sometimes or sometimes dramatic and sometimes quite weird. This takes time. There's a maturation process that
Yeah.
goes in that. And I imagine you could train people in school, like starting at a pretty early age at a
Yeah, when
basic
they're
level.
little, they can pick up that stuff more easily,
Yeah,
and you can
absolutely.
that
Kids can totally
vibration,
pick up
that
this stuff.
vibration. Now,
Hmm.
as we're getting near the end of this wonderful conversation, Daniel, I'm asking you now to address what you mean by the collective. Uh, I'll tell you where I'm coming from. That we are a collective human organism made up of individual cells. And those cells, in order for the collective human organism, which we also call humanity, to function, the cells have to do what you were talking about with the East and the West getting together. They have to be able to harmonize, communicate, be comfortable enough with each other so that they can function in some kind of cellular organ basis. Now, that's a little bit of what I'm doing. So please respond to that.
Yeah, so the cell metaphor is a very good one, obviously, and then reflecting larger collective into biologies, because functionally, like an army or a nation, do function kind of like their own organisms or units, right? And various political factions kind of function like their own. They sort of have some what appears to be sort of an edge or a definition or something to them. And um, I have this dream I have this dream that if each of the members and cells of each of these sorts of things are vastly more empathic, vastly more aware of the wide range of their own humanity, vastly more present to what we might ordinarily call shadow sides, vastly more appreciative of the fact that this system is all in this together. We can sort of talk at a very coarse level of the Strait of Hormuz, which half of the population probably never even heard of, closes, and suddenly we have world energy shocks and threatened inflation crises and all kinds of things. So like we can at a very simple political level appreciate the sense of it's an interconnected system economically, environmentally, carbon cycles, oxygen cycles, CO2 levels,
Yeah.
ocean cycles, AMOC, the current that keeps Europe warmer and more moderately temporal. These are all things that it's a whole complicated dynamic system of interactivity, us and other animals and plants and algae and viruses and things, right? Where we're all part of a collective interactive ecosystem. And it just so happens that these emergent phenomena, the sort of maturation of that routinely is described as gaining in some way some kind of enhanced, more actualized, more manifest appreciation of that in a way that has some sort of level of better to it. Now, that doesn't mean that the process can't sometimes do some very weird and complicated things. It obviously can, or that everybody gets that. I have this whole sort of
And that we live in,
caveat of psychopaths. So are awakened psychopaths
yeah,
actually better?
no,
I don't know, maybe not. So like that's
you're talking about a fundamental aspect of this reality, which is polarities. That
sure.
you get one, you're going to get the opposite someplace, and part of the opposite is the shadow. So we bring the shadow up with our own continuing evolution. So you're very much going on that, and I agree with you. Now, what about my thinking that what you are doing with your book, creating a new branch, a new field of medicine, is another way of looking at the collective human organism, that creating an organ that is intended to be of greater benefit than nations can be to the whole thing, because there still is the narcissism of nations. Yours is a heartfelt global sense where you're trying to help bring together the practices of ancient times that are currently here with modern medicine. And that is from a heart and mind of a way of trying to help the human organism function and get better in this current environment. So you're an organ to me.
Yeah, and just yeah, it's just one part of the collective system that has all these ways that hope, all these systems that hopefully are doing something useful. And it would just be one more way of very specifically addressing this part of the human experience or this broad neighborhood of the human experiences that we can have, and to have the medical world, which does have certain sort of universal culture spanning, nation spanning, world
It does.
spanning
Yeah.
aspects to it. Like what you find, scientific articles and the culture of medicine and the related innovations and technologies that go along with that, they span the globe and they cross across all sorts of social demographics. A migraine is a migraine is a migraine, kind of pretty much wherever you go, except some of those places which may recognize some potentially emergent aspects to it, which is a whole nother story. So, um, and in that sort of a way, this is one of the leverage points where if we have this vision that a humanity that is sort of more awakened or attuned to the divine or coming into the presence or whatever, pick your favorite language for this whole thing, is a good idea, then I can pretty much guarantee it will scale better if somebody in the clinical mainstream owns this stuff. And I think the trickle down effects to other specialties will be profound because I think doctors are very reluctant to acknowledge things they don't know.
That's
Right,
right.
the conditioning to never say I don't know is so strong in because you are rewarded for knowing and you're punished for not knowing. But I think even if somewhere there are some people with an MD that say, "Oh, I don't know about this stuff, but they do," like as an ER doctor, right? We kind of know the first few hours or few minutes of everything, but we can't know super depth in nearly anything except some trauma stuff and there's some things where we know a lot of depth in. But I can say, I don't know about that weird oncology thing, but I have oncologists I can refer you to. In the same way, if they're clinical phenomeniatrists or experiential medicine people, which I think will probably be the sort of in the same way you have physiatry and then they're called physical medicine rehab, right? Nobody says physiatrist, but that's what they're called. In the same way, I don't know if many people are going to say phenomeniatry, but I think experiential medicine or something like that is going to be what they'll probably say. And if they're, oh, yeah, I don't know anything about this weird thing you're going through, but there are experiential medicine people. And even just being able to say that and have a referral that you can then do and feel comfortable, and these are people who are trained in this strange stuff, that will be system changing. And I think that will lead some kind of world change of acceptance, because for better or for worse, as much as people might not like to admit it, MDs are sort of a priestly caste in some way in terms of their function in society of gatekeeping Overton windows and what is normal to talk about and what is just crazy and what is acceptable. And if we shift that, I think it will really shift the conversation globally, hopefully in very positive ways. Not that there won't be some weird stuff and unfortunate stuff that results from this. There will be.
There
But
will
that's
be
true of everything.
whenever you push against the dearly held belief system, you get
Oh
a
yeah,
reaction, and you know that better than a lot of people. But what we
that's
need to come,
true.
we need to come to the end of this wonderful conversation, Daniel. And I so appreciate getting to know what you now are trying to make happen. I didn't know this before. This specialty of in medicine that
Yep.
you are helping to create, and it's so cool to hear and imagine with you what you've got in mind, and your information load in there is immense, man. You just know a lot of stuff. Uh,
Well, you have to be an ER doctor, right? I mean, like, you know, you
well,
train in a ton of stuff.
and you have to
You
be to
see everything.
start a new branch of medicine too. You have to know a little something about a lot of different stuff. So, I admire what you're doing.
And I'm blessed by a big team, by the way. I should mention this, the EPRC is an over 300-person international research consortium, very worthy of support through the charity Emergence Benefactors. Sorry for the shameless plug for the charity I volunteer for and help support myself. So, yeah, and it's got to be a collective, right? It's got to take a lot of people, a lot of smart, talented people with a lot of little bits of knowledge that hopefully I and some of my friends can help put together in a way that becomes something eventually coherent and systems changing.
Wonderful. Um, I think that's a wonderful place to end, um, because this is we've done very well in covering a broad territory, and I just thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you for everything you do, and I look forward to hopefully reading and hearing your contributions to the new field. So excited about that.
Good.